Welcome to the Mind Over Matter podcast. Myself, David Barnacle from Healthy Souls. Got a very interesting guest today, Rupert Wolfe. He's a friend of mine, but it's a very interesting life, shall we say. Lots of very interesting parts of his history which we'll explore today. Just a few of those in brief. He spent time in Romania doing aid work, restoring orphanages, being a journalist, and restoring parts of the country itself. He's written for The Guardian, The Huffington Post and Time magazine. He's travelled, he's lived on a houseboat for a long time, he's cycled around with very few possessions, selling books, and sort of lives a semi-nomadic lifestyle as it is. But for now, thanks for coming, Rupert, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
Yeah. So where are you at the minute? What's all this travelling about? How come you're up and about and got plans to go here, there and everywhere? What's happening at the minute?
Well, I'm constantly trying to, get rid of possessions and travel be less weighed down with stuff and tied down by things. So I'm traveling quite light with just a rucksack on, really. And but I'm basically between 3 points, 3 locations, like Wiltshire, South and West England, where my kids are based, and my ex-wife, and I see them as much as possible, at least every month. And then Scotland, where I'm helping my family to empty out and sell our family house, and Romania, where I have my main job, income, where I'm a consultant for the EU on energy efficiency. So I'm basically travelling between Romania, Wiltshire and Scotland, but it's not really what I would call travel, because it's not proper travel. It's kind of just going between 3. I'm just kind of it's more like working on the move. I'm just I've worked out how to work and move constantly.
Yeah, I mean, from the outside looking in, as you say, it's more like work that you're doing, but it's a kind of work that you've carved out for yourself. It's not the usual kind of work compared to what people would think about what work is. And I suppose that's been designed or created or carved out by yourself and your attitude to life. What you're willing to be doing, which is classed as work, or not doing for that matter. At various stages. So, could you maybe give us a bit about?
Well, yeah, I can pick that up because I can refer back to when I was at Liverpool University, final year. What they call a milk round was happening, where the big companies come to the uni and set up stands, and all the students go around and basically consider different industries and maybe apply for jobs straight from uni into career structures. And I avoided all that because I didn't even go to the presentations because I just thought, there's no way I'm going to go down that route of career, big company, just not me. And I'd studied history and politics at uni here, and to try and understand the world, and in particular, why do borders lie where they do, and I started to get an understanding of how countries are laid out on the map, at least superficially. And then the next thing was, well, I've got to go and look at them, i.e. travel the world. So I've got to travel, and I can't really do that by getting tied down by a job. So I applied to go and teach English in China.
But you had a reservation about travel, didn't you, to begin with?
Yeah.
On your own, which is, again, for people listening and watching the podcast, we actually done an event recently with Rupert where we just focused on his aspect of self-publishing. And the first book that he published, which was 9 years in Tibet. And that story is all about, correct me if I'm wrong, about the initial being stuck with the idea of wanting to travel, but the fear of doing so. And that's something that you want to make quite a lot of, isn't it, when you're telling other people?
Yeah, because I talk about my nomadic work style, and then when I travel a lot. I intend to travel more later in life, but that's all the result of spending a long time working it out. As in, I mentioned jettisoning stuff and letting go of things in this Buddhist way, but the first thing really was fear, overcoming the fear of traveling alone, of like being alone, being lost and helpless and robbed, or fears of what could happen to you when you're on your own, helpless somewhere. So it took me...
All very, very valid fears.
Totally, yeah. And the first part of my Tibet book is about overcoming those fears and summing up the courage to actually head out into the East on my own, knowing I'll probably run out of money and have to get a job, and not knowing what's going to happen, and not knowing when or even if I'm going to come home again. So it took me a few years to overcome that. And in a way, that was the most valuable lesson, because it meant that I was then able to overcome other fears in life of all kinds of stuff.
Do you know one thing about doing these podcasts and speaking to people in this way and digging with yourself? A really important piece of the puzzle has just fell into place listening to you talk about that there and then, with how I know you and what your nature is like, what your approach to things is like, what your levels of confidence are like with facing new tasks or new ideas. And it's fallen into place a little bit more, that I think from such an early age, having conquered the fear of the unknown in that respect, with your journeying over to the East and not knowing what's going to happen, but going with it anyway, coming out the other side. Would that be a fair comment, that that's stood you in good stead for future life situations and give you a sense of ease?
Definitely.
How to approach them?
Definitely. And I call my way of travelling, not this work travelling I'm doing at the moment. When I go travelling, I call it travelling into mystery, which sounds really kind of cool. It's very, but it's actually very simple. It's just, all it means is that I'll choose the destination and organise the resources and time to get to that place and travel around from A to B, or from point A to point I don't know what. But the point is that I'm travelling into mystery in the sense that I don't know what's going to happen after I leave point A. I just know I've carved out some time and saved some money to do it. And it's all basically a mystery. Every day is a mystery. And I just take it as it comes. And there's going to be problems and challenges and excitements every day, actually. And
I think that's one brilliant thing to take from even just what we spoke about so far. And for everyone listening, I think there's something in a lot of people which longs for life to continue to be a mystery on a day-to-day.
Whereas there's a tendency in society for this sort of scientific approach to have everything explained and rationalised. And I just got this really simple approach, which you can apply to all kinds of other stuff like politics or economics, and just say, well, I don't know. I don't understand. It's a mystery. And then I don't need to know. I don't want to know. I can just put that aside. Brexit is a confusing, let's call it mystery. I don't want to know anything about it, though. It's a mess. And I don't need to understand it. I don't want to struggle with understanding something irrational and stupid. You really don't need to. And again, I find people find it hard to do that because they feel they need to explain everything rationally, understand it in a kind of logical way. But I don't. I feel more like a kind of medieval peasant who's sitting in the church, listening to the liturgy in Latin, not understanding a word, but knowing it's the mystery of the church and it's kind of good and he should be there, and he doesn't understand it, but he accepts the mystery and that's it. And he just gets back to work the next day.
It's a brilliant analogy. Yeah. Is that just come to you now, or have you?
No, I've thought about it, but it kind of makes sense though, and how it would have been easier for those guys in the old days because they didn't have to explain and understand everything. And so I think that we tie ourselves in knots in society by this super rational approach, and especially with computer and internet and all that. That
it's an extension of the Western mindset, isn't it? The Western Hemispherian, and coincidentally, that again, another piece of the puzzle. Do you think absorbing any part of the Eastern mindset at a young age has played any part in that?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because there's such a generalisation, but they're much more in the present and in the unfolding of time as it happens, would that be fair?
Yeah, and so people say things like, "Oh, you went to India and Tibet, you found yourself," and I go, "No, I didn't. You kind of got."
It's got so many connotations.
Yeah, and I say, well, I saw it as a continuum from my childhood. Was in Tibet, I learned some stuff, I developed myself. I'm still developing myself 30 years later. It's all part of the same journey, another word I hate. But actually, I remember, it reminds me of the story of, I used to teach monks from the monasteries in Tibet, English, and I used to go and hang out with them because they were just fun guys to hang out with. So I go to these monasteries in Lhasa, and they would just like, honestly, it would be like going to a club, a football club or something, just hanging out with the guys, shooting the breeze, banter, just bullshitting around.
With the monks?
Yeah, with the monks. And they were kind of chucking stuff at each other, teasing each other, nicking things from each other, just being idiots and having a laugh.
Okay? The idiot monks.
Yeah, because they were having a laugh, because they were like off duty.
Yeah.
And I would practice my Tibetan. I'd learn Tibetan by practicing words or saying words, and they'd laugh at me and say, "You're saying it all wrong, say it." And I'd say it deliberately wrong just to make a laugh. And then it would just be a fun. And then they go off and be really serious in the temple, meditate and chant and do it really focused, seriously. But then when they're off duty, they just wanted to have a laugh, like normal people do, anywhere really.
Yeah.
It's like policemen and officials who are really serious on duty. Off duty, they might be really fun people.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point I'm getting to is that I felt this connection with them, and they we got on really well on this kind of quite superficial level. And I picked up lots of bits and things from them, but it wasn't conscious, it wasn't even discussed particularly. But I remember these Western Buddhists would come into the monastery from the West, America and Europe, and they'd come in and they'd be really, not exactly pompous, but they'd be really sort of stiff and slightly rigid and upright and serious, because they'd been studying Buddhism for years and years and years, and suddenly they were at the Jokhang temple, where I used to hang out the most, was the center of Tibetan Buddhism. It's like the holy center of the whole religion. And this is where I was shooting the breeze and bantering with these guys and having a laugh. And these guys, this was the kind of culmination of their whole journey. And they come into the journey expecting to kind of have words of wisdom at a high level with the great wise.
It's not about that, is it?
And I could just see the Tibetan monks kind of cringing and go, "Oh God, another one of these boring Western, academic types who's going to kind of want to talk really seriously about the kind of the religion," and they just want to have a laugh, and they can't have a laugh with this guy because he's so tied up in the logic and the kind of history of it all, that these guys, and they would look at me like some sort of, these Western guys would look at me, and they couldn't put me in a box either, because I wasn't I was a Westerner, but I was kind of talking Tibetan with these guys, hanging out with them. So they must have looked at me like really confused and resentful.
Yeah.
And
forgetting on that.
But I was picking up on that point picking up with some Buddhist stuff. And also my brother was one of the first Buddhist monks in England. He joined the Buddhist, the Thai Theravada Buddhist order in England in the 80s. And we would visit him. And he would explain things, and my brother actually explained loads of Buddhist stuff to me, way more than the Tibetans never bothered to explain anything to me, because they just know Buddhism and they don't need to explain it to anybody.
I suppose if you were to ask them or probe them on it, they might be able to.
Not really, because that's another big difference between Western and Eastern religions, is that I've spent 17 years in Romania, an Orthodox country, and time in Tibet, and in those Eastern countries, there isn't that tradition of explaining the religion, because everybody's just born into it and everybody just knows it from birth, as soon as the parents.
Yeah.
And it's just drilled into you from the word go. So in Romania, I spent years asking. I got married in a Romanian Orthodox church, and I kept saying, "What's this mean? What does that mean?" And they try and explain, or they don't try and explain, because they just kind of despair that you don't know it, because everybody should know it, because everybody does know it, because everybody is.
Yeah.
And it's only recently these countries have opened up, whereas we've got this hundreds of year tradition of proselytizing and sending missionaries all over the world to convert everybody else to our way of thinking. So we've had hundreds of years to work out how to kind of get our messages into kind of communicatable PR style lessons. And basically, we've been doing religious PR for the last few hundred years, and we can explain all the nuances really fluently, but they can't because they could, but they don't because they don't bother. It's not their approach.
Yeah.
But actually, to go back to that mystery thing, it was like my approach to that journey, and I guess in life in general, was just to go in with a sort of blind faith. And I remember somebody saying to me, don't worry about food or earnings or life. I heard this in Liverpool, actually. The universe will provide. You just have faith and you just go on and you won't starve. You'll be fine. You just have faith in the universe and it will provide.
Yeah.
And I've kind of had that attitude all my life. My jobs are very short term and I don't know where the next job's going to come up. I just know that it will come. I will be fine.
Yeah.
Doesn't worry me. Anyway, in Tibet, the event that springs to mind, it wasn't the most dangerous. Oh my God, I got attacked by 3 dogs. I nearly froze to death. I nearly got shot when there was a riot. And
what was the one where you mentioned, like you were about, was it you were nearly about to be put into jail for something that was going on really seriously with the monks and the Chinese authorities?
Yeah. Well, the whole last chapter of the book was basically a riot of the Tibetan monks against the Chinese colonial control of their country. And I didn't know this was all going on until halfway through. It came out and there was a massive riot going on and the police station was in flames. And I kind of joined the crowd to see what was going on, and there was kids slinging stones at the police with slingshots really accurately. And little kids, shepherd kids, and there was shots being fired, and then I could hear a high velocity rifle being shot, and everybody ducked, and then a kid got shot dead right in front of me. Oh no, it got shot dead nearby, and they brought the kid to me because I was the only foreigner around, as if I was some kind of doctor.
Wow.
And I kind of looked over him, and he was totally dead, and couldn't actually see the bullet hole. And then the crowd marched down the road and there was another confrontation. And by this time I was so inflamed with anger against the Chinese for what they were doing that I'd become reckless and I was ready to kind of fight and do something crazy.
Yeah. There's like a rebelliousness.
Yeah. But, and a complete absence of fear to the point where it was reckless.
Mm.
And I could have done something crazy or, luckily the whole thing calmed down before I did anything crazy, but I've definitely got that side to me where I can be reckless. And I just read this thing in the Tao 365 about the way of the warrior. Do you know that?
Rings a bell. I've heard that phrase.
Where basically it says that the warrior in kind of ancient Oriental lore is a very peaceful man. He's not looking for trouble. He's not striding around, a macho man drinking beer and asking for a fight, like in Scotland. He's very peaceful. He wants to resolve problems and help out and do his thing and totally avoid conflict because he knows how serious it is. And he's an expert in deflecting, both in physical terms, but also...
That's the root of martial arts, isn't it?
Right.
That's
is it?
Yeah, it's not about looking for violence or wanting the violence. It's as things come your way, trying to...
But the point being that the kind of final resort is violence, if you absolutely have to.
Last resort, yeah.
Yeah, so you've got all these kind of first resorts and initial resorts and reactions, and whereas there's this kind of tendency, and funny enough, talking about the military, you mentioned the military. I did a couple of books about the military in Bosnia, and I used to think the military were like all tough guys strutting around the place looking for fights, because I'd kind of grown up in that Scottish boozy macho culture of boozing, drinking and fighting every Saturday night in the pubs and then vomiting, and that's the kind of Scottish culture as far as I'm concerned. And then some of them join the army and get all tough and blah, 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 and, macho. So I kind of thought in my confused mind that this is what the army was like. But actually, it's not. It's more like the way of the warrior, as in the people who've experienced war, full-time soldiers, are the last one, the most peaceful guys you could meet. The last ones who want a war. It's the politicians who usually do want the war for the other reasons. And then you get these what they call weekend warriors, who are the amateurs, who are like really angry people who join up for bits of action and call themselves soldiers, but they're not real soldiers. They just go for a bit of action sometimes. So, for example, in Bosnia, I heard this amazing story about how there was these front lines all over the country between the Muslims and the Serbs and the Croats, all over the country. And I was told this story about a front line between the Muslim and the Serb area in northeast Bosnia, Tuzla region. And basically they were villagers that knew each other. So they were like, if you imagine either side of a field, both in the trenches, sort of shouting abuse at each other, but also chatting and bantering and chucking. They'd be chucking rocks and beer cans and just hurling abuse at each other and having a laugh, probably playing football. God knows what they were doing, but they weren't actually fighting most of the 5 years of the war. But then the Serbs would sometimes say, "Watch out, lads, the weekend warriors are coming." And what that would mean is that up in Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, all these kind of really hardcore, macho, hate-filled people who'd got their own weaponry and they'd joined some sort of paramilitary unit, they'd all get on these buses and come down to the front line after finishing work at 5 o'clock on Friday.
Looking for a fight.
Literally looking for a fight. And then they'd come all dressed up with kind of body armour and guns and where's those Muslim bastards, let's go and get them. And they'd have this kind of, and then Saturday morning they'd have a big fight, they'd do a charge and try and take some of the terrain and try and kill a few Muslims. And then Sunday afternoon they'd go home again, Monday morning back at work.
So when you say they were joined up with a paramilitary group, was that connected to some kind of governmental approach to how to resolve this?
Absolutely. So the government, the Serb government under Milosevic, Slobodan Milosevic, he encouraged, enabled these paramilitary groups to recruit all the nutters and enable, empower, arm them and get them to the front and get them doing really the nasty work. And then he would enable local militias to develop in the Serb majority areas of Bosnia. And then he'd use the actual former army of the Yugoslav National Army, used to be a massive army, a kind of old-fashioned communist era army. He'd use them as kind of other pieces in his chessboard.
Mm. But were they all willing to dance to his tune, or were there factions of that country and the army that were like, look, it's not the way to go?
More or less, yeah. But he was really clever about it. So, for instance, the army didn't want to do the atrocity stuff. So the army would move in tanks and infantry and artillery, into the area. So there was a big force there, but it wouldn't do anything. Well, it sometimes would, but usually it would just sit there as a kind of backup, as it was, to say we're going to stop the Muslims invading us. So they would just sit there, and then they'd send in these paramilitaries to do and then they'd go into like a Muslim Serb village, and the objective would be to get all the Muslims out of that village. So they would go to the local Serbs and say, oh, the Muslims are going to be attacking, so we've got to, and they've been recruiting Muslims in this town, so we've got to kill them, or we've got to do something before they get to us. So they'd round up the local Serb leaders on their side and say, okay, let's go in and let's attack the Muslims before they get us. And they'd basically go and massacre hundreds of Muslims with the locals, who'd be quite shocked by all this, but they'd be kind of caught up in it by now, and caught up in fear and propaganda. And they'd end up killing thousands or hundreds of Muslims in that village, burning people and driving the rest of them out. And then the point being that all the locals were now compromised. They were now what's the word? Accomplices in the crime.
How are you getting this information? How are you able to know that people really didn't want to comply, but then ended up complying and being accomplices?
Well, I lived there for 2 years.
And your job at the time, you were trying to put this book together to show.
Well, I did the book after the war, but during the war, I was running an aid agency that was working in the middle of all this.
So this is an important piece, as I say, of the history which you mentioned before, which is the setting up of aid agencies in that part of the world, where of course there's lots of conflict, there's lots of mess to sort out, and you've set something up which has raised millions of euros, I believe, and has achieved a lot of good in that area. But so what you're saying there is, even before the books, you were, through your work in the aid agency, charity, is that another word, phrase for charity? Is this how you're so you were like on the ground, being able to get this information? You're tied into certain networks and seeing what's going on firsthand.
Well, I didn't see that stuff going on firsthand. I wasn't a witness to any atrocities. But during the war, I went there, and my aid agency had a big operation during the war where we built houses and rebuilt water supply systems. Because one of the other things the Serbs would do, and I know all about, was if you imagine the Muslim population of Tuzla, about 750,000 people, a city and lots of outlying villages, who would be connected to the electrical system and water supply systems. And what the Serbs would do is they would target with their artillery. This is where the Yugoslav National Army would come in. They'd use the artillery and they say, look, we want to bomb their water supply systems, where we're not bombing civilians, so no one's going to get hurt, maybe a few workers, but not big casualties. And they would bomb their artillery, destroy water supply systems, where you've got a water tank sucking up water from the river or lake, filtration, and feeding it out to population. I think it was 500,000 people were getting water from the regional system, and the Serbs deliberately targeted and smashed it. And the problem there is that can then result in hygiene problems and disease.
Sanitation, yeah.
So the project that we did was we then repaired. So rather than get involved in feeding people food, which is really complicated and kind of endless, you can never really finish that because it's like feeding people every day. It's a nightmare. Or medical stuff is another nightmare, but it's endless work. What we did was we went in and fixed we went in with engineering equipment and hooked up with local, I was talking about local suppliers yesterday, found the local water engineers, the workers, the local municipality guys, and fixed up all the water supply systems. So within a few years, those 500,000 people were getting fresh water again. And
that's the sustainable
way
of doing things.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. Because we would avoid doing things like getting involved in the feeding or the medical care of people, because it's just one of those, that's like an endless job. Mm-hmm. It's like if I'm running a project, I'll avoid paying a salary because a salary is an ongoing cost. Whereas if you pay somebody a fee to do a job, even if it's a big fee, you know that the job will be done in a period of time and he'll be off. Whereas that salary, the implication is it goes on forever and ever and ever.
Yeah, there's an end point, isn't there, with the fee? There's a job needs to be done in a certain amount of time.
But about the aid agency thing, it's really easy to set up a charity or a business. Anybody can do it. You just need an accountant and a couple of just a couple of people to have a board. And it's easy to set these things up, but it's really hard. As any businessman would know, it's really hard to make, as they know from business, the 9 out of 10 businesses go bust in the first year. Mm. And it's probably like 9.9 out of 10 aid agencies, charities go bust, or just don't make it beyond a few little charitable things.
So what do you think, because this was your first time doing it, what do you think was give you the the ability to make that particular idea in the form of that aid agency as successful as it was? What would you think are the key things or the approach which would make it work? I mean, we did speak about this yesterday, and so I'll throw it in if you don't get there. But
no, we didn't get to it yesterday because
well, I mentioned one thing, which was about actually caring about the situation enough.
Well, yeah, that's the key. That's the key, really, is caring about the situation and listening and doing your understanding the situation simply by listening to local people, not by some clever assessment. Or you can come in with all kinds of clever evaluations. And I work as a professional EU evaluator at the moment, and I'm coming into Romania now with a very rigid form which I have to fill in, and it's fine. It's going to a system, an empirical system, but I always find it's best just to go in and chat to people and find out what's going on. As how I found out about what was going on in Bosnia was just simply by year after year talking to people and listening to these stories about what was going on, and then reading, trying to back it up and trying to cross-reference it. So, but basically how to make a successful charity is the same as how to make a successful business. Have a good idea which works. Simple as that. Literally, like...
It sounds so simple.
Well, it is. It's so simple. It's like... But it's not simple. Anyone who's trying to do a business will know it's actually really difficult to make your great idea actually pay the bills, because
it's the motivation as well, I think, isn't it? You know, if someone can start out with the motivation of, I want to make a pile of cash, but and then from that comes the, let's think of a good idea, and then it's like, let's see if this good idea makes that pile of cash.
That's it.
Do you know what I mean?
Same formula.
But what you're saying is, you're not saying the root isn't the money. The root was the situation and wanting the situation fixed.
No, but it's the same root in a way, because as you said yesterday, the root of a successful business is solving a problem.
Yeah.
So there's a problem, and your business or charity should resolve that problem. And then
the money's secondary to that. Then.
Of course, it's secondary in both cases, actually. But it's not. It's really important in both cases also, because without the money in the charity, you can't go on.
It's necessary, totally necessary. But just as your primary fuel.
Yeah. But I can tell you how it happened in Romania, and because it started in Romania, and our charity started in Romania, moved to Bosnia, and then we got taken over by the Americans, who are the big guys, Mercy Corps. And
what corps?
Mercy Corps.
Mercy with a Y.
Yeah.
Oh, what a name.
Yeah.
It's like an oxymoron in a way, isn't it? Mercy with corps, like, which has got like connotations of corporations and warfare.
Yeah. But so in Romania, for instance, 1990, there's a lot of publicity about Romanian orphanages, and people were really willing to give money. And
for maybe the younger audience, people who may be unaware, can you just give a bit about the context of the situation in Romania at the time?
Yeah. So basically, Romania was one of the many countries where communism fell in 1989, and it was one of the few countries that opened its doors to the orphanages, and people and journalists saw how terrible the conditions of institutionalized children were, and it got all over the news over here. And Romania got associated with these terrible orphanages, even though they were in all the countries, but Romania was the only one that opened up to journalists.
Why was there so many orphans?
Well, basically...
or was it just there was a similar amounts, but just the way that they were handled was different?
Well, there was so many because it was used as an extension of the care system in Romania, communist system, where they'd shove into care homes. It was a kind of option of a kind of cheap boarding school thing, where if you couldn't afford to look after your kid, you just shove it into an orphanage. And if you were disabled in any way, you'd get the kid taken off you, because the state would look after it, and it was a shame and all this stuff. So,
so and then the whole extension of the communist policy.
Oh yeah. And the country was rapidly industrialized, so people were having to go to factory work, and the family structures had been broken up and moving into cities, and it was just a symptom of a sick system, basically. But and then what was happening in the early 90s was that all these people from Britain and Western Europe were piling into Romania with truckfuls of donated goods and money to try and do stuff, but nobody really knew what to do.
Like you were saying earlier about how difficult it can be to just feed people or
not so much that, but that's a different problem. This problem is they'd show up in Romania with goodwill stuff and money and say, we're here. And then people would say, well, yeah, great. Okay, we'll take your money, we'll take your stuff, but you're not the orphans, you're just some guy in the city. Oh, but, and then get into all kinds of problems. And then they go to the orphanage and say, oh, thanks very much. Take the food or clothes, and it would be gone in a few months because that's the nature of it. The stuff gets used.
Yeah.
And it was all a bit kind of hit and miss and ad hoc and unorganized and not targeted. And we worked out very quickly how to do it, which was, there's no point, because the first convoy we went in was 23 trucks. It was organized by somebody else. And it was a total shambles. They didn't know what they were doing, where they were going. And my brother Magnus kind of ended up taking it over and starting to organize things. And that's when he got into aid work. He'd been basically a skateboard bum, and he suddenly became an aid guru. And then we realized what we've got to do is find. And I then went. I was working as a journalist then. And I went around the poorest region of Romania, Moldova, and found the worst places. The worst. One institution said, look, when you come back with your next aid convoy, we've got to move in there, actually live there, because there's no point delivering a few trucks of stuff. It's all going to get nicked anyway. And even if it's not going to get nicked, it's going to get consumed and it's going to have no effect. We've got to move in there and actually do a root and branch reform of this one institution. And which is what we did. We spent 2 years in that village, in that home, doing it up, raising money, hiring staff, turning it around. And on the one hand, the big aid agency would say, well, that's ridiculous. That's a micro project. They look at strategic systems and they look at regions of countries. And so they're looking at a very high level. And, so they say that's ridiculous doing this kind of micro thing. But I say it was really useful experience for us, and it was really good use of our time, because otherwise we'd have just been running around the region. And what happened was that we then became a kind of center of advice for other people. They'd come to us and say, well, we've just turned up with a truck with this stuff. What do we do? And we say, oh, well, we know this place down the road. And we'd farm them out to other places that we knew. So we became a kind of coordination center.
Mm-hmm. I think what I was getting at, which you have answered, but I just want to probe a little bit further, is I'm drilling into like the success of that agency.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you've said so far is it's a mixture of the fact that you cared enough about the situation, which there may be another route to that. It may just be something innate to you as a human that you've seen a situation, or it could be different. It might be the fact that you spent time there and know people there. But it's a mixture of that and know-how, brains, common sense.
Common sense. I would just say it's, to your question, it's neither the super big brain solution, rational scientific solution thing, nor is it us being lovey-dovey, carey snowflakes. All it was just listening to people, because if you listen to local people about what they think and genuinely listen, not just do a kind of formal evaluation interview thing, you actually chat to them and say, well, what do you think about that? And they'll say, well, we've been saying this for months. You've got to do this. And then you ask somebody else and they confirm it, or you get confirmation of, and then it'll become pretty obvious what the answer is. Is that and the Westerners are not doing that because they come ploughing in with their kind of solution from Britain and they haven't bothered to check. And because they've put so much effort into organising their solution, they don't really want to hear the local side of it because it might contradict what they've spent the last 6 months doing.
Yeah.
And
you can see it's come from a good source. They're trying to put a plan together to work it out, but it's the plans put together, removed from the situation and people with the information.
Yeah. And then what a big agency will do, it will then commission studies to confirm what they're already doing. And they'll arrange the questions in a way that confirms what they're already doing. And we just hang out with local people and chat to them. It's simple as that. But it's about being open. I would say the key word is just being open and listening, and then being able to go back home and motivate people back home to actually mobilize and support and get money together. And then
well, I'd say there's probably a humility involved in it.
Yeah, definitely.
To put you in a position where you will listen to whoever that is.
Exactly, that's the key word. But there's also common sense in that you need to work out who's worth listening to and who's just a local drunk. And because you get a lot of bullshitters like everywhere who talk crap, and everybody's got an idea about how to solve the problem. But, so then you've got to apply your common sense. What's worth listening to? You've got to filter out the rubbish and choose, and then apply your own common sense. And so, for example, in Bosnia, what really made my agency a success there was, well, the water thing that nobody else was doing, fixing the water supply system. So once you fixed it, 500,000 people were benefiting, and it's done, job done, move on. And then housing. So thousands and thousands of houses had been shelled by the Serbs, who had all the artillery, by the way, and there was thousands of houses empty, and there was concrete frames all over the place, like 4 walls, but no roof, no doors, no interior of the house, but the frame was there. And what the big Western aid agencies were doing was that they were shipping in from Western Europe house kits, those kits you get on the back of a truck.
Yeah.
And they ship it down
to a pop-up house.
Yeah, those big,
like what they do with McDonald's.
Yeah,
sometimes that's just like
so basically they'd send to Croatia house kits and stack them up in the port, and then they'd come down with these huge low loaders and drive it through the front lines of Bosnia, and then deliver these Scandinavian houses up into the mountains of Bosnia, and then they'd say, how do they have to bring the experts in to build them because they're kind of foreign design. And then the whole thing would cost about 30,000, well, it was actually about 15,000 quid.
Per house.
Per house, okay. And then my brother just said, he spoke to locals and worked out, he said, hang on a minute, isn't there a cement factory here? Yeah. And aren't they still doing stuff? Yeah. Well, somebody, I don't know whose idea it was, but it was basically, let's get a tile machine. So we imported, rather than a house, a tile making machine, a roof tile making machine, and donated it to the local cement factory, who started making roof tiles locally. And then we had this old army truck that we got from Britain, which was our kind of one of our transporters. And then every day we'd fill it up with tiles and take it, and then another truck with roof timbers, and take it. And then our local guys would talk to find out who owns that particular ruin, gets the local mayor and the owner of the house to sign an agreement to say, yeah, we own that shell of a house and we'll do it up. And then we turn up with 2 trucks, one full of timbers, one full of roof tiles, and just dump it in front of the house and go. And that was job done. And then they would round up the neighbours and say, right, let's get to work. And they would all know and start assembling the roof timbers.
But what a brilliant way as well, though. Not just to build the house, but to build the community feel in the morale.
Yeah.
Almost.
And the cost of that was about 1,500 quid, down from
15 grand.
Down from, so 90% cheaper. And then that actually got adopted by the UN in Bosnia as the way to do it. And they call it self-help housing. And that became the way of doing it.
One of the key points or things to take from what you say, and it might not even be people, but in situations like that, it's where's the local on the ground knowledge and information. It's using what's there in the place that you are to help with the problem that exists there.
Yeah, but that sounds easy enough, but it goes back to that word humility.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't got the humility, you're not going to listen to the locals. Just think he's some peasant who doesn't know what he's talking. He doesn't know the latest scientific papers on construction. But
so would you say humility then is necessary? Because I assume people listening to this podcast is, watching a video. There's an element in who this is being provided for. People want to find themselves, live their own life and make their own decisions and not be dictated to too much by overarching structures of how you should work and where you should work and what you should do and who you should listen to. Just in it, that finding yourself thing, which is a bit of a vague term, but what we're uncovering here is some of the ways in being able to do that, because we spoke about whether it's setting up a business or just having that entrepreneurial mindset. I think what's really coming out from speaking to you is something unusual and not what people would really associate with how it works, how you get it to work, trying to live the lifestyle of your choice and your making. And well, certainly for you, the humility aspect and the willingness to listen seems to be a key feature in how do I pursue the life I want to lead. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. After all that, we've probed a lot into the successes of your situation, aid agencies in Romania. But just tell us a bit more about how you actually ended up there, because
in Romania,
because you'd started as a journalist, hadn't you? Where's the link there with journalism and travels in Romania?
Right, yeah. Well, it actually goes back to Tibet, where I got thrown out of Tibet in October 87 because I'd been witness to this riot I was telling you about earlier. And the last chapter of my book's full of I got like a week-long interrogation by the police, and they kept trying to write a confession I wouldn't do, and then it was all got a bit ugly, and I got thrown out. And I describe it, the blow-by-blow account, last chapter of my book, which incidentally is just out as an ebook. So
Rupert Wolfe, 9 years in Tibet.
No, I love your new title of it. I love the idea of 9 years in Tibet, but unfortunately I'm going to have to correct you because it's 9 months in Tibet.
Oh God, sorry.
It's okay. I love it. Yeah, no, it's better. I've been upgraded big time.
Yeah.
Anyway,
maybe that's just an indication of how I see time. I think
it's fine. I was going to let you go with that. Yeah, makes me sound more impressive.
Yeah.
Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, journalism. So basically, I was kicked out of Tibet, and I was in Kathmandu, skint, and I didn't want to go. I just wanted to go home, basically, to Scotland. And I phoned my parents and said, "Look, can you help me raise some money so I can come home? Can you maybe try and contact a newspaper in London and see if anybody will take my eyewitness account of this riot?"
Because, and just to interject again there, you being able to ask that question of your parents gives a little hint to the connections that your mum had, because your mum was a publisher of a big book company at that time.
Well,
wasn't it?
My parents set up a company called Canongate Publishing.
Yeah,
which never really made any money when they were there, but it got a bit like my aid agency. It got taken over by these people who made it into big success. It's now one of the big British publishers.
So did they have contacts?
Well, no, not them, not my mum. It was my dad, he'd been a kind of fringe journalist type reviewer, film reviewer, and he phoned the foreign editor of the Telegraph, who said, "Oh yeah, I'll give him 500 quid." So I wrote this article for the Telegraph, got 500 quid, and I thought, that's me sorted.
500 quid back then.
Yeah, 30 years ago, I am so loaded because I'll do one every day, and I'll that's me. Here, Mercedes, here we come.
I'm now a journalist.
I'm now
big time.
Yeah, I've arrived, and so I got home, and then a literary agent saw my article and said, "Why don't you write a book about it?" A book? How do you write a book? She said, "Oh, just write a synopsis and a first chapter." So I did that and sent it in, and she didn't write back. And I thought, well, I'll just keep going. And I kept writing, because it's writing. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Why write? Really good point is, if you do these amazing journeys, you come back, you've got to process all the experience, and you either go and bore people rigid, which is what I did first time, or you write it all down and get it off your chest in that way. So writing is a way to kind of process it all and then get rid of it and move on.
That word process, I understand what it means, but I think there's a therapeutic element to it as well, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. And in lots of therapy uses writing to process things.
Yeah.
So it's a really useful way to process the experience. And then I had all these illusions that my book was going to make me famous and rich immediately. So as well as the journalism, I was going to make tons of money from my book. And then when the fact that the literary agent wasn't replying to my now finished book manuscript, I thought she must be selling it to the highest bidder in New York at this very minute. And I'm not sure whether I should buy a flash car or a house in the countryside with my big advance. And then she eventually said, "Oh, well, it's not quite right." And I realized
for their publisher,
for publishing generally. And she was right. Yeah, she was right, because it was actually really, it was, every chapter was different from the last, because I'd finish every chapter. I think that was a fantastic bit of literature. And then I'd wake up the next day and read it and say, "Who wrote that shite?" And then the next chapter was better. And then the same thing, the next chapter was better. So each chapter was different from the last. It was like all over the shop. But that's, I was learning to write. So at the end of all that, I said, well, I need to rewrite it. But before I'll do that, I'll get into journalism. I'll teach myself journalism so that I can learn to write better. And which is a pretty stupid thing to do, really. I should have just rewritten it. Because it's like kind of...
just wrote and wrote.
Yeah, it's like working in a bar to learn how to cook. And you just... And then I said to my dad, I said to my mum, who was a publisher, and she dealt with literary critics and really high-level journalists. And she said, "Oh, journalism, you were really bad in school. I don't think you're going to make it. These journalists are really intelligent, and I wouldn't want you to be disappointed. I think you should get into recycling. That's much more important."
How did you take that? Did you take that as constructive?
Yeah, I did, because I took that as a challenge, thinking I'm going to prove her wrong.
Yeah. That's what I was getting at.
And then my dad, who was actually working in a newspaper, The Scotsman, as a film critic, he was there every day. He'd say, "Oh, it's a great idea that a bunch of bozos, you'd be much better than them." So I was getting these two messages, which were both encouraging. And and then I taught myself journalism by copying articles and kind of doing exercises with the articles from The Independent, which used to be a really great paper in the 80s.
When you say taught yourself, do you mean like the format of the way it starts?
Yeah.
Getting the who, why, what, where, and when in early and stuff like that?
Well, in particular, what I would do is I'd find an article in The Independent that I liked, and I'd rewrite it and put in my own words. So I'd keep the structure of their article, but I'd add in new words and just experiment with it to see how, and by copying out a few articles in longhand, and changing the whole thing round to have a completely new story, but using their structure and their style.
Yeah.
I could kind of adopt the Independent style of writing articles. So it took a few weeks of messing about and doing these experiments.
Yeah.
And I kind of got it, and then I was ready to start. And the first thing I wrote was actually an obituary of one of my lecturers at Liverpool University had died. This closet gay guy who was a very camp professor who died, and he had a really interesting history. And I wrote an obituary for The Independent, and then started. Oh, that's right. And then I applied for a job at the Scotsman in Scotland on Sunday and got ignored. But they wrote back to me 6 months later and asked me to come and write about China, what's going to happen in China.
What's going to happen in China?
Yeah, what's going to happen in China? And I said, well, that'll take me a month.
You're going to pay me to research it?
Yes, no, I said, give me 4 days. And they said, well, you've got 4 hours.
4 hours?
And I said, that's impossible. I said, no, it's not. That's loads of time. And I wrote something after 4 hours of panic, and I think that's my end of my career in journalism. And actually, they published it and said it's fine.
My God.
And
I didn't realise the stakes were so high, or the times were so short.
Actually
be given a task and complete it.
That was like 89, and I started writing about the communist countries, Russia and the former communist countries. I sort of had some experience by them, Tibet, China, and then all those revolutions started happening in Eastern Europe in late 89. And I interviewed somebody from Romania who said, it's not going to happen. You talk about listening to people. I interviewed this woman who just turned up from Romania, and she said, the revolution in Romania is never going to happen because the secret police and the Communist Party are far too strong. And I wrote that. And the following week there was a revolution. The system was collapsing. And the editor of the paper phoned me up, and I thought, oh shit, he's going to fire me for getting it all wrong. And he said, Rupert, you're on the story, the big story, the front page story. So he obviously hadn't read it. He'd just looked at the headline and thought, Romania, Rupert, give him a call, get him in.
Little insight into how editors choose material there.
So suddenly I was on the front page, and I said, well, you've got to send me to Romania now. And he said, send me to Romania? You're joking. I said, Scotland, we can't send you anywhere. And we just give you peanuts. And then I really hustled to get to Romania, and I missed the actual revolution, but I was there like in January 1990. And saw plenty of stuff. And we actually made a film called After the... We've got a film, you can see the clip on YouTube.
What's it called?
It's called After the Revolution. And it's just listening to people on the street talking about what they're thinking. Mm-hmm. 6 months after the Romanian Revolution, the newspapers decided the people are no longer interested in Romania. We'll shut that story down. And the only story they were interested in was orphanages and, AIDS, babies with AIDS, and real horror story stuff. And I said, well, I don't want to write about that. It seems to me unethical to go and write about children in really horrible situations. And they said, well, if you want to work, that's what you've got to do. So I had this ethical choice. Do I continue in journalism, or do I do something else? And the other problem I had with journalism was that I was getting tempted by corruption, because I could write about somebody, quote somebody, and he gets his name in the paper, and it might have some economic advantage being in the paper. So I could maybe use that to get a bribe or advantage. And I could just feel the pull towards corrupting influences. And one of the keys of living in places like Romania or Bosnia is that you've got to avoid corrupt opportunities at all costs. Or the one thing that you've really got is your reputation. And you've got to keep that clean at all costs, because people get word of the fact that you're into dodgy dealings. Mm. And even if it's not true, if they just, the word is there, you won't be trusted anymore. So I've always avoided those situations even before they arise. So in the case of journalism, I could see this kind of corrupt opportunity would help supplement my shit income. And I just thought, well, time to jump ship.
Yeah, it's quite honest of you to talk about the sensations.
And, well, it wasn't so much that I was actually taking bribes. It was like, what I was doing was I was interviewing people. I was actually chatting to people, listening to them, and then quoting them in the article, but without asking their permission. Mm. And I thought, well, it's going to paper in Scotland, doesn't really matter. I'm quoting this guy, Dave. He's never going to know. It doesn't matter. But ethically, it was wrong. Yeah. And I knew it was, but I couldn't. I was so badly paid, I didn't care. But I kind of caught up with myself and said, it's got to stop. Just like when I was married, I was an unfaithful husband, and I was basically living a lie, and I had to deal with that. I had to say, I can't do this anymore. I can't be a cheat and a liar anymore. I've got to stop. So I got divorced.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. That's again like so candid and so open, and I'm sure like a lot of people would have a lot of difficulty even going to that place and speaking. But is there do you feel okay talking about things?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem that way, but I wanted to check that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
it's like an ease with that, and an ease with the self along with that.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I've learned from it and I've corrected my, it's like navigation. You correct your route.
Yeah, there's no judgment of yourself, it seems, for that. It's like, okay, I've made a mistake there.
Yeah.
We make mistakes.
Well, actually, it's not so much, no, it's like, obviously when I got divorced, there was a couple of years of really bad strife with my ex-wife and a lot of bad feeling on both sides and blame and all the rest of it and anger, which lingers for years. But now we got on really well.
Yeah.
And I, when I go and visit my kids, she lets me stay. We trust each other. We're not pals exactly, but we trust each other. We talk about stuff. We get on fine. And that says it all, really. The fact that relationship is totally repaired.
Yeah, that's the evidence.
The evidence, yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got to work at these things. You've got to work at repairing. And it's really difficult, actually. That's one of the hardest things in life is to go to people you've had a big row with and sort of, it's humility, isn't it, actually, one of the things. But it takes time also. Before you can be humble, you've got to get off your high horse.
So what's your process for that?
Well, it's like giving it time to be angry and be on your high horse, and righteous indignation has to run its course. And you have to come down off your high horse and say, well, okay, maybe she's got a point, or maybe I need to actually build the bridges again, and then come in at it sideways. So don't go back and say, oh, I'm sorry about everything I did or whatever, but just start talking about something else. Like we need to talk about the kids' holidays or whatever, and you talk about something else, and then it's all quite friendly about the other issue, and you gradually work your way back round to the real issue, which is like repairing the damage that's been done, and apologizing at the appropriate moment.
Yeah,
it's not easy. It's like that's probably one of the hardest things in life, actually.
Repairing a relationship with someone with whom there's difficulty.
Yeah,
or apologizing.
Yeah, like not only a relationship as per se, but like family members and friends that you've had a falling out with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's probably similar to me. I mean, I'm always willing to want to make the effort, but there's ways of doing that, isn't there? And I think there's ways of doing it where sometimes apologising is actually trying to take the moral high ground in situations.
Yeah.
And you have to check yourself when you're doing that as well. I think for yourself, that can appear from time to time.
I think you've got to give it time to let the anger work its way out of your system so that, I mean, for instance, one of the things I've learned is that if somebody sends you a really annoying email, I've learned that if you reply immediately, it's like a big mistake. It's petrol on the fire. Whereas if you leave it a few days, it all starts to settle, and in a few days' time, you're going to be able to send such a much better reply.
What do you think about the tactic of? And I think it was Abraham Lincoln that this is the most famous person who done it. He found after his death loads of letters, stuffed in where he used to keep all his private stuff. I think I actually read this in How to Win Friends and Influence People back in the day when he.
You mean letters he didn't send?
Yeah,
brilliant.
Because he used to have
major
fallouts with army generals, who didn't do something really, really important in the course of the conflict. Other politicians. And he would be in his letters. You'd be absolutely scathing of them, like the worst possible things imaginable. He'd be saying to them about them. He never once said that to any of them, and they would never have known he actually even had them thoughts. That's
brilliant because you get it all out. It's that thing of I was saying earlier about processing the thoughts and the anger and the energy, getting it on paper, and it's all you kind of shat it out your system, as it were, and then put it in the drawer. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I wish I'd done that more in my life.
Yeah. My notes on my phone is full of like massive like texts that I've written into the notes first, and purposely written them into the notes in case I pressed send on the text by mistake.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? But just like getting it out.
Yeah, and yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah,
you're really good advert for. Again, I think these kind of podcasts, these kind of channels, people who like to read them, we've got an interest in spiritual matters, that kind of life. But with that, we cling on to some of the connotations of what we think spirituality is, and we get attracted by some of the ideas and some of the superficial things that stand for what spirituality is, and we can go off down certain pathways and trying to lead certain lifestyles, wear certain clothes and speak in certain ways which conform to what we think might be living a spiritual lifestyle. And you mentioned it about the Western monks that come over adopting a certain way of what they thought it meant to be spiritual or to be practicing leading a Buddhist lifestyle. And then you've got the real Buddhists just being normal people. And similarly with yourself, I think it's a good advert for, without trying to necessarily be into spirituality or living a spiritual lifestyle, I think the story and your approach is doing that regardless. You mentioned about the mystery of the the unknown part of life. People mention a lot about living in the present moment, not thinking too much about the future, and that's it's a really big thing within spiritual circles, of getting into the present moment. And I think it's really nice to know and speak to someone who, in some way, is embodying that in a way that's not shouting about it. It's not saying, "Oh, look at me, I live in the present moment," and it's not coming at it from that way. But there seems to be a natural ebb and flow about the situations. Which
I'm getting a lot of inspiration from this book called 365 Tao.
Yeah,
and Tao just makes perfect sense to me. And although it says, "Don't call yourself a Taoist and don't cling to labels,"
that's it.
And part of it is just being open to this stuff. And then when you hear or read something, it helps you refine your approach slightly.
Yeah.
So, for instance, living in the present is really vital for happiness. And I mentioned earlier, leaving behind, writing out your experiences and then leaving it behind, moving on.
Yeah.
To me is essential.
Yeah.
And not clinging to the idea of Tibet, for example, or Romania for that matter.
Well, it's easier said than done. But
Yeah.
I'm hoping that what people will get, from listening is a sense of a bit more how to do that.
But I just wanted to add something that I picked up recently. It's all very well talking about living in the present, but what's the practical? I've learned a practical technique of this in the last year that I find really useful. So I've been living on houseboats, as you know, and I ended up in this little houseboat, it's basically like a caravan, going down the canal from Reading to Bristol, and every time I read this thing in the 365 Tao that just fitted my situation perfectly, which was that, look, living in the present is really simple. It's basically, you just don't leave any loose ends behind, or don't leave any mess behind. And I translated that into immediate action so imagine you're living in a houseboat, you've got a little kitchen, a little fireplace, a bed, you've got your stuff spread out. And I'm probably getting back late in the evening when it's cold, and the last thing I want to be doing is cleaning up. So I would make sure everything's washed up and cleaned and tidied and brushed down, and if not laid the fireplace, at least emptied the ash from the stove and had it ready to make a fire quickly, because you really need that fire quickly. Make the bed. So when you get back that evening, i.e. in the future, you know that it's going to be tidy, and you're going to worry about making dinner, and ideally you can lay a fire. So you lay the fire now for the evening, means that you'll be one step closer to having an easier evening.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of translated that into life generally, because I move around. I haven't got a permanent base, I haven't got a home. I like to tell people I'm homeless, and it kind of shocks people, because homeless is supposed to be some sort of lost soul. Mm-hmm. But I'm not at all lost. I'm totally content. I don't need a home. I've got so many places I can stay. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous, actually. And Because when you're like me, everybody wants you. I mean, I've got people who want me to come and look after their house or stay at their place. And there's so many empty houses around. It's ridiculous. So many people who need help with their houses. And I like doing housework and gardening and stuff. But what I was getting at was, and I've got into this technique since the houseboat thing, where I'll always make my bed and make my clean up everything after I cook, and leave a nice tidy space. So don't leave anything behind that's going to create a problem for somebody else, and that's maybe related to the future. So I leave the house nicely and tidy, and maybe send them a thank you card. And that's actually setting things up for the future, so that if you want to go back there in the future or maintain contact with that person, they're going to have a pleasant memory of, oh yeah, he sent me a card, or he did the washing up, or he was okay. He wasn't a pain in the neck slob, you know. And so that you're doing stuff in the present that is directly impacting the future.
Well, there's a conscientiousness about that as well.
Yeah.
It sounds like. But yeah, well, you know, thank you for sharing all that. Thoroughly enjoyed.
And sorry, can I just share one other thing, which from Romania I learned was not in the present, not to commit to anything that you're not sure you can do. So somebody will say, "Can you come and do this for me?" I say, "Well, I don't know. I'd like to, but I can't commit." Because if you commit to it now, and then you're like, "Oh shit, I'm double booked," it's a problem, you know. So, and I learned this in Romania, where all these people would come out with aid, and we'd help them, show them around places and guide them to other places. But what they would do is they'd meet people constantly who'd say, "Oh, I'm so poor, I'm so desperate, I need this, I need that." And they'd feel sorry for them and say, "Oh yeah, of course, we'll come back, we'll get you that at home. It's easy, we can get you this, we can get you that." And then they'll go to the next village and say the same thing, and the next village and the same thing. And they won't take a note of any of this. And they'll go back feeling really confused. And all these local people will think, "Oh, great, that nice Western bloke, Dave from Liverpool, he's going to come and give me table and chairs," or whatever the hell he said he'd give me. He helped my kid through school with money. And of course, Dave's forgotten all about it. And they end up really upset and depressed. And meanwhile, you've forgotten all about it and moved on. So I always think it's really important to not commit to stuff in the present. And I've made that mistake millions of times, particularly with relationships. You're feeling really strongly about somebody, and you commit to a life together or whatever, but actually, you don't know what's going to happen in a year's time. I'm not saying not commit, but you don't. But I find that I don't need to say, "I'll love you forever, I'll live you forever," all this stuff. You just prove it right now by making the dinner or being nice right in the present.
That's a fantastic place to leave it. I think it's like do what will express that right here, right now.
Yeah.
No empty promises. Well, thank you for
cheers,
coming in, speaking, and I'm going to have fun listening back to that. And I hope everyone else does too.
A lot of editing to do.
Well, thank you.